days that we saw the Holy Spirit moving among us.
What happened in the background? Oh,
hi, everyone. Welcome. Phil.
If you're I'm Phil Dickey. I was really loving the snow globe background. If you're not on the actual live stream, you're missing out because there was a snow globe background on the intro video that we have. So there it is. Dexter's
layers upon layers.
Dexter's running things from behind the scenes here, and he's putting in all kinds of fun backgrounds. So this is just a good teaser for you to come check out the podcast on YouTube, or when we do it live on YouTube or Facebook. But if you're just listening to us, then you'll just have to relegate yourself to Mitchell's and I voices, and that'll just have to work.
It'll work. It's good to see you.
Happy Merry Christmas week.
Merry Christmas week. We've done it.
We've done it.
Barely.
We're here. It's Monday, and we are live on the podcast. Took us a few minutes. You know, it's quite actually it fits pretty well because yesterday in our service you preached about disappointment, and so for all of our beloved fans who had to wait for a few minutes while we were trying to get some technical things figured out, they just had to. It's very Advent, right? Wait, and then be disappointed by the fact that it didn't start on time. It's fine. Everything fits.
We have 0 people joining us live, so
look, we're up to 1. Hooray!
Hey, it was all about disappointment this past Sunday. If you did not have a chance to worship with us in person or online live, you can watch the service on our YouTube channel. I think it's on Facebook still. And catch up. It was Advent 4, and we are now on the other side of all the Sundays in Advent.
Yeah, which feels weird.
4 candles now.
Totally.
So 1 left.
What's the one left, Mitchell?
The Christ candle.
Indeed. And when do we get to light it?
Friday. Well, technically Thursday.
Technically we light it on Thursday, yeah.
Yeah. So Christmas Eve worship also 3 p.m., 6 p.m., 11 p.m. On YouTube and Facebook. So if you want to watch all 3, please do.
More power to you.
Yeah. So we're looking forward to worship this week as we kind of move it through this Christmas season. But yesterday was great.
Well, a little faster than that. At 3 p.m. is the family one, our family service. So it'll be more geared toward children and such. Yeah. So bring the kids along and bring a shaker or something to make noise with and join us for that. And then the 6 o'clock is our more traditional, typical service. And then at 11 o'clock, I'm excited about 11 o'clock service. I think it's going to be a fun change of pace. And it's a more contemplative service. And so I'm going to do a little meditative piece in the midst of it. And we're going to read a little bit more of the Christmas story in the Gospel of Luke. So I think it's going to be fun. I'm excited about the 11 o'clock service.
For sure. It's going to be great.
Yeah. So yesterday, 4th Sunday of Advent, you took us on a bit of a turn that I wasn't really anticipating when we entered into Advent, which, in your defense, you weren't planning to preach yesterday.
I'm not sure that I need to defend this choice.
You don't need to defend it at all. Text. I'm just saying, for people, this is our behind the scenes, like day after Sunday, right? Like yesterday was supposed to not be like another regular service, right? It was supposed to be the pageant, right?
Right.
And so I think talking about disappointment is quite appropriate because for many who really wanted the pageant, we didn't get to have it.
They were disappointed.
In the fact that Mitchell was preaching. It's fine.
Right. So we were, you're in good company though when you're choosing texts that are also in the lectionary, Phil. So, this text comes out of year A in the lectionary. Okay. So it's not like it was just totally left out, out of left field. But yes, we diverted from the traditional Mary, Joseph, shepherds, angels journeying to Bethlehem kind of Lucan stories, and we didn't bring in the Magi. We just jumped ahead 30-something years to John the Baptist in prison, really asking Jesus if he is the Messiah. And I anchored the text in this idea of disappointment, kind of getting a sense that when you hear these words in Matthew 11, that John the Baptist is kind of disappointed in how things have kind of unfolded as of late. He's been arrested. Everything kind of seems the same, if not worse. And he asked a very poignant question to Jesus. Are you really the one that you say that you are? And I think it's a fair question that we probably have asked God, this year. Are you really the one that you say that you are?
I'm harassing you about it, but I really think it does fit extremely well given the scenario and circumstance of where we are this year specifically.
Right.
And, as I thought about it, and I thought about this idea of joy in the darkness, and, we talked about, I think maybe week 1, about Barbara Brown Taylor and her whole idea around befriending the darkness. And I even wonder, to some extent, if that almost feels like too much to ask of people at this point, like there's just so much happening that even like trying to befriend the darkness may feel like toxic positivity, just because I think there's some people who are just sitting in the muck and need to just
sit in the muck.
They don't need Job's friends there, like trying to like talk him out of it. Right. They just need friends who are going to sit in the muck with them.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
and I think
the darkness,
it is it feels very juxtaposed, like the paradox between like decorating, hanging up the stockings, having the Christmas tree over, doing a lot of baking this year, putting up the lights, and then like the kind of sad reality that like no one's going to actually come over and see our house. Like we're not going to be able to share a meal like we normally would with all of our family. And so it's kind of feels like you're going through the motions just to like create some normalcy and feeling of like it's going to be okay. And also recognizing that like, do we know that it's going to be okay?
Yeah.
And I think that's what John the Baptist is asking. Like, I trust you. At the end of the day, like he certainly trusts Jesus enough to get himself arrested for him. He certainly made very public declarations about who Jesus is. Jesus certainly understands how important John the Baptist is, because at the end, after he has given word to John, hey, this is what we're doing. And he turns to the crowd and says, John the Baptist is literally like the greatest.
Right.
And yet there's still the question, like, is this thing even worth it? Like, are we actually going to see what we need to see? Is God actually going to redeem the world? And I think that is the same question that I bring, I bring to Christmas Eve this year. Like, is God actually going to do what God says God's going to do?
Meaning what specifically?
Is God actually going to show up in the midst of all this?
Right.
Because it seems so it seems like God is fairly absent from 2020, right? Like in all the ways that we would want God to show up, like stop a pandemic, create more justice in the world, like create more equity and like dampen like the anger and the like polarization. Like, where's God in the midst of this world? It feels God's fairly absent, and I think we have to look very hard or allow ourselves to be kind of retrained on how to find God in the midst of this, because it doesn't feel like if this is part of God's plan, I don't like this plan.
God needs to come up with a new plan.
Yeah, totally.
It made me, like, the more I sat with the service and your message and thinking about what we're going to talk about on the podcast, it made me start thinking about the work of people like Thomas J. Ord and kind of this idea of relational theology. And, his latest book, I guess his latest book was Question and Answers from God Can't, but his book before that was God Can't. And it's a lot of this idea of there are things that God can't do. And the fear or trepidation that may come with admitting to that, or like giving up that idea that God has, all powerful, the omni, what is that? Potent?
Omnipotent.
Omnipotent. There we go.
Omnipotent. God, and I think this also fits with, not that God couldn't, I think is the better way to look at it. But because God made specific choices about how we were going to be empowered, that limits God's power on the other end, right? Like God loved us so much to give us the ability to choose. If we have the ability to choose, then God can't overcome our free will, right?
Yeah.
And so I look at it kind of in that way. It helps frame Christmas better for me, and I think I get there, and I'm going to try to get there for Christmas Eve. It's this idea that like God chooses not to make it all right, but God chooses to be fully present in it with us.
Yeah.
And if we can get to that understanding of God, that that before God makes it better, God first experiences it with us, then I think we're on to something.
It
but
almost
it still seems kind of self-serving, right? Like, why don't you just make it better?
Yeah, and honestly, it almost feels like if you really want to get that first Christmas experience, like this feel not that first century, Palestine had a global pandemic like this, but like it was pretty dark times, right? Like it was pretty bleak, like being under occupied Rome. Like there was a lot of really difficult things that were taking place in the midst of that. And so if you really want to get what joy there really is in the darkness of that, or what good news really means to people who are really suffering, like I think more than any year, we can really enter into this aspect probably than probably any year we've ever experienced in our lives. And so, and as much as I despise this pandemic and the coronavirus and what it's resulted in, like it does prime us to have an experience with like God with us and God showing up. And again, not that we have to have bad scenarios for God to show up, but we're there, right? We're in the midst of it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the John the Baptist, that's just like, I don't know. I think it spoke to me this week as I was preparing the sermon, and just this idea that even God's answers can be, we don't know how John responds to Jesus's, I guess giving him the assurance that Jesus thinks he needs, but we don't know how he responds to it. But it would be kind of I would be disappointed in that. Because that's not, John the Baptist is not getting any new information. John the Baptist knew all those things before he was in prison, right? Sure. John the Baptist knew that Jesus was walking around and healing folks and bringing good news to the poor and all that stuff. And so I think like sometimes even God's response can be disappointing, right? Like not only can God be disappointing us when God seems to be absent, but even when God shows up, it can be rather disappointing because we expect something so different than what God often gives us.
There we go. Had to mute myself for a sec because my dog is barking in the background. Speaking of disappointment, and I don't know how we sit with that, right? I don't know, like especially around a time of Christmas, like you said, of this kind of like dichotomy or paradox that we sit in, where we're supposed to be happy and excited about everything right now, but the reality is there's so many things happening that cause us to feel otherwise, and I don't even know like if people have a good place to express or process what they're feeling and what they're going through in the midst of all that, Yeah. Because who are we talking to? Mostly people who we live with for the most part, and maybe like one or two other people. But I think that's where I do get worried and concerned that we don't have the way to deal with the grief and process a lot of the things that we're experiencing on a regular basis right now. And it, like I know mental health has been a big topic of conversation among a lot of people. But I think it's something we're like coming out of whenever post-pandemic is or whatever that looks like. I think this is something that's going to have very long effects that we're going to have to figure out.
Yeah. I don't know if I said this year, I've said it before, Christmas isn't a season. It's a reality. And when we extend Christmas past Christmas Day and understand that God choosing to be with us in the midst of it, I think gives us a larger runway to kind of have some of these questions and sit with them and ask them and probe them, because the truth is, I think you're right. We're going to have this post-pandemic reality of like trying to sort through our emotional state and our mental health and our spiritual, like where we are spiritually, is going to be a really long road. And I mean, you're right. We don't know what the effects are of being like essentially isolated from one another for an entire year or more, right? And you add on top of that the grief and the pain of losing someone, or of losing a job, and like it's just like compounding. And I wonder then, like, how do we make sense of that? And I think it's helpful to look at Christmas then as like not just a day, but if there's ever a year to like say, no, this is like a Christmas year.
Totally.
Right. It would be 21. This idea that God chooses to be in the midst of it. We can still be disappointed in that choice because we want it to be different. But just because we're disappointed in God, like I said in my sermon, doesn't mean God's disappointed in us. And I think God continues to stay with us until we understand, right? Yeah. God doesn't leave, right? This is the idea of prevenient grace. God's not like offering you, it's not like the Matrix. Here's the red and blue pill. You have one choice to make. And if you make the wrong one, like, well, that's it. Like God continues offering us a better understanding of who God is and who we are in relation to God. And like, that's just a constant that I've come to know about God. And I think like, I'll need that in 21 because I'm going to be upset or frustrated or apathetic or whatever spiritually. I mean, let's just frame it there. I already am, right? I think we're all over the place spiritually.
Totally.
But we need a God that's going to be fairly constant in God's presence. And from there, we can reorient ourselves to ask those really difficult questions, like, how are we? Like, how is it with your soul? And not in the like generic, hey, how are you doing? But like, oh gosh, we need to do like a real inventory on our spiritual health, along with our mental health, along with our physical health, along with like our relational health. Like, right. I don't think we have the capacity to do it now, but I think we have the responsibility to do it when we gain that capacity.
I like this idea of 2021 being the year of Christmas. It makes me think that, like a lot of people celebrate Christmas in July. Maybe we need to just plan for that coming up, right? That, we're going to celebrate Advent a second time with Christmas in July, and just recognize that. I think in my head too, there's like, oh, that'll be perfect because that'll be about the time that majority of folks have been vaccinated. Like we can actually
have our candlelight on the summer solstice.
There we go. See, perfect.
Yeah, just take it all.
Flip it all upside down. We'll celebrate with our folks in the Southern Hemisphere who are rocking the winter. Yeah.
So I think this disappointment language is beneficial because ultimately, I think we're all pretty disappointed.
Yeah.
And Jesus then kind of invites John in the text, and we can end here, but Jesus invites John to look and see all the people that he's hanging out with. Not as a way to say that like by making them whole, they are redeemed, but simply by the act of them recognizing that God is the one that can make them whole, redemption starts happening.
Yeah.
And it's not about an end product as much as it is about an experience with God. Once we come to a place where we know that we are essentially totally dependent on God's grace in some form or fashion in our lives, then I think we can actually start living and we gain agency, and ultimately we get joy. And if joy is about being empowered and having agency and like being able to maneuver in this world, then I think like Jesus is inviting John into something much deeper than just like, this checklist of things that must get accomplished.
Yeah. So real fast, I know we probably need to wrap here soon, but like on a practical aspect, you mentioned this idea of, a year of Christmas and recognizing that God is with us. And what are things that you do on a consistent basis, or practices that you have that help remind you that God is indeed with us, especially in tough times, but just in general as well?
I mean, some of it's the real simple stuff, like, because we're in the, it's changed for sure. We're in the midst of a pandemic, but some of it's simple. Like we've really gotten serious about like our prayer time at dinner and like inviting Cash to see that. And that's been really grounding for me, knowing that like, if I didn't believe God is present, then really what am I doing? Am I just passing off empty traditions? And it doesn't feel empty.
Sure.
It feels really, really important. I think too is like not mourning. I've had to get over like routines being disrupted, with second kid. And so I always thought things ever had to be like really perfect. Like my prayer life has to be at 5:45 in the morning, and then my meditation, and then like I get my coffee, and then I get my exercise in, and then, I can interact with people, right? I needed the routine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think realizing that our spirituality is not dependent on routine. I'm not saying routine's not helpful.
Sure.
But like we can find ways to be very aware, very grounded, very grateful, and very in tune with God without routine. And I think it's just a matter of trusting that those moments when you're nudged to kind of slow down or pay attention to something, you recognize it more for what it is, and that being that, maybe the Holy Spirit's like grabbing at you, or God's trying to like invite you into something. And so I found myself just pondering like what's going on in my backyard, and all of a sudden like I'll be staring outside, for 5 minutes, and it's just what I never did that before. I never took time to just like stare at the trees and wonder if like, what's going on up there can lead to like me having a very strong appreciation for this moment. And so I think I'm trusting my instincts or my intuition more to be my guide right now than like the ability of like a schedule, because who has time for routine right now? I mean, I guess we all do to a certain extent, but it just feels really hard to keep in the midst of this year.
Takes more energy and work just to keep a routine rather than
I like, why are we spinning all these plates? Like I'm spinning all these plates, but why? For what purpose?
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of similar ideas based on kind of an intentionality thing of opening my eyes to recognize it, just along with routine, like that the rituals that I'm used to aren't the same at all, and that where I've expected to have kind of like, whether you want to call them like divine encounters or like spiritual moments based on specific rituals, like whether that's because of a dog, like that just jumped in the middle of here, or because my kids are home a lot more, or whatever the case may be, like along with the routines, the rituals have been really interrupted. And so it's making me like forcing myself to be intentional, kind of what you were saying of like having a lens on to see where God is showing up and where I'm seeing these opportunities for divine encounters. And I think nature's a big part of it for me, and I have to get myself outside. I almost have to force myself outside more often, because was it Martin Luther that said that nature was God's first revelation? And if we can't get that one right, then we're never going to understand the second revelation, meaning the Bible. And and I have to force myself to be outside more often, it shouldn't be a force. I love being outside, but just with everything else that I feel like I'm supposed to be doing or need to be doing or have to be doing, like I just have to get outside, and then I can be more in tune with kind of like God showing up in the midst of all the chaos. And rather than being frustrated by my children like I was yesterday, then I can have better patience for them and recognize it. Like most often they're the ones who are the best example for me of what God's love really looks like, And,
yeah, totally.
And I need to be reminded of that as opposed to being annoyed by them, which
Definitely.
Full confession, I get really annoyed by my children a lot of times. So, and that's my own fault, like it's just because I'm not taking a deep breath and recognizing.
Being present.
Yeah, exactly. So,
well, however that looks for you all, let us know where you're finding some spiritual energy in life, and what those practices look like. And I look forward to we're going to take a couple weeks off, so we're going to recharge, regroup, and we'll be back in the first week of January. So January 4th, I think we're back on the pod. And it'll be Epiphany. It'll be really great.
Yeah, we can talk about the Magi.
Awesome. Well, Phil.
Hey, man, it was good. I hope that you have a lovely week and that you can find some routine to help you if you need it.
Merry Christmas, buddy.
You too, bud. See ya.
All right. Bye. You're listening to a podcast recorded at White Rock United Methodist Church in the heart of East Dallas. For more information, you can find us at wrumc.org. And make sure you stay subscribed to this channel to stay up to date with all of our content.